And I'm really excited to introduce Connie McCutcheon, who is the president of MISA Canada, but also the director of communications on the Go Open Data Board, who is part of this community, has been a founder of this community, and has a lot to say, and is going to be guiding us through the panel. So Connie, please.
Hi, everyone. I got a lot to say? Is that a compliment? Anyway, I think I've brought a few people in, okay? So anyway, yes, my pleasure to be here moderating this Open Futures panel. We have three exciting panelists that are gonna look at our open future from a few different lenses: the open data lens, the AI lens, and the societal lens. So our first panelist is joining us remotely, and it's Stefaan Verhulst, and forgive me if I have mispronounced that. He is from GovLab, Data Tank, and a co-founder and director of the data program. So with that, Stefaan, feel free to carry on.
Great, thanks so much for this kind introduction, and thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the Go Open Data, and unfortunately I wouldn't be able to, I wasn't able to join you in person, but hope we can have a conversation virtually as well. So let me quickly share my screen, and I hope I can do this without embarrassing myself. So the assumption is that you can see my screen. If someone could let me know, that would be great.
We're good.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I was asked to very briefly reflect on the future of open data and data in general. And when I started reflecting on that, I basically reminded me of Charles Dickens, who was, you all know, had an opening sentence in his book, Tale of Two Cities, where he reflects on it was the best of times and the worst of times. And from my point of view, when we think about data, I think it is indeed moving into potentially the worst of times, but also potentially the best of times. And so he ends the sentence by reflecting that we are actually entering a spring of hope, but also a winter of despair. And so what I hope to do in kind of the next 5 to 10 minutes is to really reflect on what is the winter of data, and are we entering into a data winter, question mark, but also what are some signs of hope? Are we also actually potentially entering into a spring of hope, or as I would call it, a fourth wave of open data? Now, in order to go there, I think it's important to, of course, understand how we typically approach open data and access to data. And we typically approach it from the opportunity that indeed we have massive amounts of new data sources that have been generated as a result of digitalization. But unfortunately, a lot of that data is not accessible nor reusable. And so we really need to address as a society the issue of data asymmetries that have emerged as a result of massive digitalization, but also as a result of us not being able to really organize ourselves in a way to make data more accessible for reuse. And so a lot of the work that we have done at GovLab and also at the Data Tank is really to address those data asymmetries. And obviously, open data is one way, if not the best way, to actually lower the asymmetry that exists in society with regard to who has access and who needs access, and how do we provide access as well. But obviously, there are other ways as well in order to lower the data asymmetries, such as data collaboratives. Now, when I look at the current state of data asymmetries, unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic. And I feel like we are actually losing the battle to lower the asymmetries that exist and that have been created in society. And I've written recently a blog where I've tried to ring the alarm bell with the question whether we are actually entering a data winter. And that's mainly the result of our, and not our, this community that is currently present here, but mainly the obsession that we have seen among policymakers, and especially also quite often data users, as it relates to AI. And from my point of view, we are losing the attention and we are losing the battle as a result of actually lowering the data asymmetries that exist in society. And I'm just going to give a few exhibits to support my, my worry that we are actually entering a data winter. The first one is, of course, as it relates to open data. And the Open Data Barometer, who you all know probably, and I'm also on the scientific board of the Open Data Barometer. If you look at their latest report that tries to give a scan of actually how are we doing worldwide as it relates to open data, well, their assessment was not that optimistic. Basically, their assessment was that governments are slowing, if not stalling, their commitment to open data, and that in some cases, actually, progress has been undone. With other words, we're actually seeing a backsliding as it relates to governments' commitments to making data open. Now, as it relates to other data, because it's not only government data that needs to be made open, and we have done at GovLab a lot of work to also unlock private sector data, or what we quite often also call non-traditional data in order to inform public interest decisions. There we also see a backsliding. Just look at, for instance, platform data. For years, Twitter data, now X of course, was actually accessible to researchers in order to understand, for instance, sentiment in society, or to understand even particular kind of behavior that might indicate for certain kinds of trends in society that is important to identify. Twitter basically has made it almost impossible for researchers to currently have access to the data, have priced the data in a way that actually traditional and university researchers cannot afford anymore. And what we have seen more recently, same thing is happening for Meta, which has closed its CrowdTangle, which was actually a really useful tool to have access to data in order to also understand certain kinds of trends. And so platform data is actually being closed down as we speak. The same thing, a lot of the focus, of course, of this conference has been on climate data, and a lot of the great initiatives have been presented. Yet, unfortunately, what we are seeing is actually also a closing, an enclosure of climate data. Climate data, and traditionally, has always been fairly open because it was actually quite often produced under the open science principles and shared broadly within the scientific community. But as a result of the trend towards ESGs, and as a trend to actually start measuring and using data for pricing, for instance, as well, we're actually seeing that climate data has become less available and is actually privatized more and more as well. And so we see also an enclosure of a particular kind of data, in this context, climate data, which is why all the initiatives that were presented today are super important to actually fight against this kind of enclosure as well. And then the last exhibit I will use is the exhibit which I call generative AI anxiety, where actually generative AI has had a negative impact on data commons, or on the willingness to start sharing data, mainly because many open data platforms, and especially data commons, kind of peer-to-peer knowledge commons platforms, feel that a lot of the generative AI services have basically extracted the data without a return on the data for the data commons as well. And we see this with Wikipedia. I was spent a whole week recently with Wikipedia, who is really up in arms because a lot of the data, of course, has been used. I would say generative AI would probably not exist without Wikipedia, but obviously the impact has been that many less people are going to Wikipedia. Why go to Wikipedia if you can just go to a generative AI service and get the same content? And many contributors that typically would contribute to Wikipedia are also more and more demotivated to actually add content, because why would you add content if it becomes immediate fodder for actually training data for generative AI that is controlled by a few organizations? So we have a real concern, and then other knowledge commons have actually then tried to monetize some of their data, which in itself has created an upheaval within the community, that this was never the intention to actually become monetized as well. And so as a result, I would say I'm really worried that we are entering a data winter at the time of an AI summer, and that we really gonna have to spend more time on putting our attention again on how do we keep data open. And especially, I think it's in the best interest, of course, of any AI developer to join that movement as well. Now, as I said, it's not all negative and pessimistic, because we also may actually enter a spring of hope. And generative AI might actually be a positive development down the line and down the time as well. And so this is here the screenshot of a recent report. Actually, we released it this week, where we are trying to examine between open data and generative AI. And we wrote the report because we got numerous requests from open data platforms, but also from statistical agencies who are really worried that if you go to generative AI and you type in a particular kind of prompt, most likely the prompt would be answered not using their data. And if your mandate, like statistical agencies, if your mandate is to inform society, and society is becoming informed tools that are not relying on official statistics, then there is a challenge. And so the question was, how can we make open data more user-friendly for generative AI, but also how can generative AI actually be a force that generates a new wave of access to data, a new way of actually democratizing data. And so if you know, I'm not going to go into the report, it's about 60 pages, but ultimately we have identified kind of 5 scenarios where open data and generative AI intersect. I'm not going to go in all the scenarios, but the most interesting one from my point of view, which makes me optimistic, is where actually generative AI provides for a more conversational interface with open data, and where actually the traditional open data platforms can become even more democratizing, because the interface with the data can be more conversational or chat-like as well. And these are just a few examples of what we see. One, for instance, is Census GPT. It's kind of an early effort in order to make access to census far more conversational, where you actually type in a prompt and you get an answer. But also Wobi AI, for instance, is a super interesting effort where they try to provide access to open data for journalists, where journalists can go and just type in a prompt and they get an answer that they can use in data stories as well. And then, of course, Google has developed Data Commons, which is actually a really interesting project as well. Now, all those initiatives would say is that there is great opportunity for generative AI to make open data more accessible and more conversational. The only problem is that much of the existing open data is actually not AI ready. And so the real challenge for making really a fourth wave of open data will be to how do we upgrade open data in a way that it becomes actually AI ready? How do we ensure that the quality and the provenance of the data is up to standard so that it can actually be used by generative AI and in a more chat-like fashion as well? And how do we also make sure that this is not done in an extractive way, that actually when you release open data, that actually there is no tragedy of the commons, that you actually also support that opening up of data in a way that can be beneficial as well. And so that's why I've also been working more and more on actually moving into kind of a data commons approach, where open, of course, data can still be provided, but it's also more managed by actually a community that really can understand that certain types of uses might actually be harmful, and that certain other types of uses should be more promoted as well. And I think we really have to come to grasp on how do we do this in a way that actually supports open data in a way that actually is more sustainable and also more responsible as well. And I do believe that we actually need to reinvigorate the movement. Of course, this conference is an example that the movement is still alive and kicking in Canada. But I think from my point of view, we need to put data back on top of the agenda, especially open data. Everyone is now focusing on AI for good reasons, quite often out of fear or quite often because they believe this is the next shiny object, but without really bridging the data divide and really investing more and more in open data, we will actually fail to leverage the benefits that data and open data can bring, because we will see a further backsliding as well. And so that's why I've been calling at the UN for a decade on data, where we actually really become more serious on bridging that divide as well, and so that we have a positive data future as opposed to a data winter. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefaan. I'm going to go with it's a bright open future, bright open data future, because I'm thinking that AI summer is going to bring a lot of sunlight. Anyway, I hope everybody's optimistic with me. So next up, we have, talking about our societal futures, is Dr. Ashleigh Weeden, who is a research associate with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and an old friend from my open data world. So welcome, Ashleigh.
So hi, everyone. I'm a longtime fan and a member of this community. I think Yuri and Connie have brought me into this for about a decade now, despite not really having anything to do with data technology or anything related to the hard side components. And I've been tasked with talking about societal futures in under 10 minutes, which seems cruel. I had a plan for what I was going to say today, but I happened to be driving in on my way from, I live in a rural part of the country. And as I drove in, I passed by an encampment of our unhoused brothers and sisters. I passed by the massive destruction of farmland with McMansions going up. And I was driving into a part of this city that I've been coming to since I was a teenager. I used to take bagpipe lessons from a former police officer in a shop around the corner from here that has now been gentrified beyond recognition. This made me angry, really angry. And Yuri said, the only question with me today was how dark I was going to go. And I'm often accused of being like a candy-coated dark chocolate, like it's bright and colorful on the outside and sort of bitter on the inside. And that's maybe not all the way untrue. And I want to sort of phrase this with someone I deeply admire, David Douglas, who is one of the architects of Ontario's Greenbelt, said to a group of aspiring planners, if all you're going to do is approve zoning bylaws and zoning amendments, you might as well quit right now. What a waste of your considerable talent, time, and energy if that's all you're going to do. And driving here today and passing by those sites and really feeling that deep down in my soul, I kind of had that same feeling about coming here. I've been part of these agendas for about a decade. We've been talking about largely the same things for all of that time. And so if all we're going to do is talk about creating data sets and releasing them, what a waste of our time, talent, and energy. The things we really need to be doing are thinking about, why does open data matter to those people who are unhoused? Why does it matter to people who are addicted to opiates, to people who can't get a family doctor? Why does it matter to people in Mexico City who are running out of water right now as we speak? So we really need to think more about, who are we doing this for? What is the point of this? What is the point of us? What is the point of good if we're not doing it for good? And I think that you really don't have to look very far to figure out that we've lost our way. There are more than a dozen Auditor General reports in the last few years alone that point to the Government of Canada not knowing what it's doing at all, whether it comes to delivery of social services, to reaching the people who most need those social supports, to environmental policy. We're not only not collecting the data, we're not doing anything with the data we have on our hands to actually make evidence-informed decisions. What a waste. I think that it is disingenuous to talk about the promise of technology if it's only for the people who are here in this room, the people who are lucky enough to have the privilege and the resources to come to Communitech, to work here, to have access to post-secondary education, and access to thinking of their future outside of, am I going to survive? Something that should have been on every newscast over the last 6 months is that we have less than 2 years to decide if this is going to be a habitable place for humans to live. The Earth will continue. It's not about saving the planet. It's about saving it so it's a place we can actually live in, not alone thrive, but will we survive? And so what I want to invite the people that are in this room and as you leave is, What makes this agenda, this day, the work that you're doing, any different than the work we said we were doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago? I have the luxury of being a second-generation civil servant, and I'm looking at Dan, who's a colleague of mine from way back in those days as well. And when we talk about things like climate change data, we've known for 50 years what we needed to do. My father is an agricultural engineer, and I've had the luxury of growing up around somebody who understood and cared about data evidence for making good policy. Unfortunately, we have wasted that runway. And I think we spend a lot of time, and what I'm doing right now is trying to purposely be scary, because we do spend a lot of time worrying about not panicking people and thinking about those bright sunshiny days, right? The AI summer and the spring of hope and all that kind of stuff. And I'm so critical because I definitely believe that it can be better. It should be better. We know better, so let's do better. So what does that look like? First, I'm going to start with an invitation to say we have to actually accept reality. I'm looking around this room, I'm the only one on a respirator. And that's because I have a compromised immune system. I live with a cancer survivor. There's an ongoing pandemic that has not ended, and it's a biopathogen that will fuse your brain cells together. I need my brain to be employable. I have accepted that reality. This isn't fear, this is me saying the world has changed and so must I. Same with climate. I no longer travel more than half an hour to go to a conference or to speak anywhere, because if I don't actually practice my values, they don't matter. The other part around acceptance is actually acknowledging that things are as bad as we think they are in order to make them better. We actually can't use things like open data sets and the group of intelligence that we have here in this room if we don't admit to ourselves that we're culpable for how we got here. We might not have broken it, but we're responsible for fixing it. Part of that is the second pillar. I want to talk to you about grief. We have to mourn those things that we have to let go. Facing the future that we want to have as a society, whether that's through data and the use of technology or how we work together, requires us to admit that we're going to have to let go of some of the things that we enjoy doing because they're no longer productive or valuable for the way we're going to make it through as a future. And you can't look at somebody and say, oh, you can't have your gasoline car and you can't have this and you can't get upset about that. You actually have to go through the process of grieving these things, of saying, maybe it's not appropriate that I go to Aruba for vacation every year anymore. And I have to let go of that and understand that that's something I'm grieving in order to make space for what's coming next. Otherwise, it's a millstone that will weigh you down. The third thing I want to talk about is that responsibility is hopeful. I'm saying all these things and I sound quite negative, and I know Yuri and Connie are kind of like, wow, she really did go dark, is because responsibility is actually the ultimate exercise in hopeful futures. I don't see it as an obligation or a burden or something difficult to do to have to change my behavior or change the way I show up in the world in order to make the future possible. You know, we look at all these sci-fi movies that say you go back in time and you change one tiny thing, the butterfly effect that's going around as a popular meme on a lot of social media sites right now. And we say, if I change this one tiny thing, it'll change everything future. But nobody thinks about changing one small thing right now. And that responsibility means that we actually have to confront the fact that I think in our confrontation of Thatcherism, where she said there's no society, only individuals, and the progressive front said, okay, that's not true, and that is not true. But we've gone all the way to the other end, and we've said there's only systems and structures, not individuals. What you do individually doesn't really matter. We can't critique the individual. We can't critique the individual organization. We have to look at structures and systems. Well, what are those structures and systems made of? You. So every decision that you make, every comment that you say in a meeting, every time you show up and actually say the thing that needs to be said, you are changing those structures and systems. But you do have to look at your individual actions. And if it's just about releasing another data set, well, how is that actually changing anything? Who is it for? What are you doing this work for? And we have to really acknowledge that part of that responsibility means that I am actually individually responsible for a lot of the things that are going on. And that's hopeful. That's good. That means that we can radically alter the future forward path. But it requires that we actually look in the mirror and go, do my words and actions line up? If I'm promoting this open data portal, if I'm trying to create this thing, if I'm looking for the DIY toolkit, who does it serve? What is it for? Who's going to use it? How will they use it? What will it actually do to accomplish something good in the world? And so I want to leave you with my thoughts around hope, which is that it does no good to sort of close your eyes in the darkness. You have to acknowledge that it's dark, and then you have to go look for a light. Light a match, turn the light switch on, get together with friends and build a fire. But to wander around in the dark just saying it's dark all the time is no good either. And so one of the ways that we acknowledge those things is actually saying, what will this get us towards? And every day showing up, do these line up? And there's ways to do that in big and small and everything in between, but it really does require that we get real with each other and say, what is the purpose of this meeting? What are we actually trying to accomplish? Who does this matter for? Or does it just make me feel good? And it's okay to admit when that's the truth, but you have to admit it to yourself. So if we want there to be a future, we have to work on a good present. When we think about breaking that barrier, what I want to talk about as a final note as we head into thinking the end of the day is break that barrier between what's happening in this room and that encampment out there. The destruction of the Greenbelt, Highway 413, electoral reform, structural inequity, any of those conversations. If the work that you're doing in open data does not connect to any one of those goals and actually doesn't meaningfully address something about those issues, then figure out new goals. That's what it means to unlock innovation. It actually means to unlock all of the barriers to and resistance that you have to doing work that matters. All of the bullshit excuses we give ourselves, all of the reasons that we say that we're not powerful enough, and all of the reasons that we give ourselves for excusing inappropriate and ineffective action. So I'll leave you with one thought, which is go be the light. Turn on the light. Say the thing that needs to be said. Acknowledge reality, and then move on and do work for good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashleigh. And oddly enough, you know what? Acknowledging our own personal responsibilities in this does give me hope, right? The people in the room here, we all have the ability to have a bright future. We just got to make sure we align with our goals that are about people and really important things. So anyway, thank you.
I forgot my paper.
We have one more panelist for our open futures that's going to look at the lens of AI futures. And it is Nat Saberi, with the co-founder and CTO of GeoMate. So would you mind coming up and sharing with us your lens on AI futures? Thanks, Nat.
Thank you so much. This is Nat, or Nastaran Saberi from GeoMate. When Ashleigh was opening the talk, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm screwed. How can I change my plan? I can't change my plan. So I prepared some educational content for you guys, and future in AI is super big. I'm not credible enough to talk about future in AI, but I'm going to talk about the existing current status of AI and some generative AI tools and technologies for you. So I have a presentation. And I guess this is the green button, right? Okay. Oh, okay. Ah, awesome. Cool. Okay. Cool. So I'm excited to share my insights on AI and the trends on artificial intelligence and how it's shaping our world. And in this presentation, I'll guide you through some AI history, some applications and emerging trends and how it defines our future. So let's start with a quick look at the historical evolution and the trend of AI. It started with, it's very interesting, with the Turing test in which year, 1950s. The Turing test is about the test on assessing machine intelligence. And it's very fascinating how this British scientist, the mathematician, thought about this 70 years ago. He wanted to test how a machine can demonstrate the intelligence and understanding of a machine. But there was a lot of criticisms over the past decades that it's not assessing the understanding, it's only assessing the human-like responses. But when you look at it, it's still a problem that we don't really know a machine is understanding, which is giving responses to us. Like in human, when you talk to ChatGPT, you don't know if it is mimicking or if it is really understanding what you say and responds to it. So in 1960s to 70s, the symbolic AI came, but before that, 1956, the term artificial intelligence was coined, and it was the official beginning of AI in the academic field. In the next decade, there was symbolic AI, which was dominated and focusing on rule-based systems, as well as the knowledge representation. And then we had the expert systems in 1980s. We had the winter of AI, which there was less funding in those periods of 1970s to 1980s. And then with the rise of a lot of data and analytics and algebra, we had the shift towards machine learning with the advances with neural networks and statistical learnings. And then it was really interesting to learn that in 1997, Garry Kasparov's chess master was defeated by IBM's Deep Blue machine in 1997, which was showing some evidence of growing capability of AI. And in 2010s, we had deep learning. We had a lot of data, and in 2016, Google's AlphaGo could defeat the world champion Go player, which was another historical breakthrough in complex strategic understanding of the machine. So we have, of course, another breakthrough, which was the rise of NLP with ChatGPT pioneering, among others, in 2023. And the end of 2022. So here, I want to move on to the current state of AI, and we know that AI has come into every industry, transforming how businesses works and even how we live. So some key technologies and methodologies that we use are deep learning, reinforcement learning, natural language processing, and computer vision. So in deep learning, we empower computer vision and NLP. In reinforcement learning, we use optimal actions through trial and error, which is best suited for robotics. It's like you do an action, then you get punishment, and then another action, you get reward. It's reinforcement learning, and is best for robotics. We have natural language processing, which is basically trained on a sequence of words, and then it predicts the next words. And we have computer vision, which is a system that analyzes images, videos. It's useful for many applications, which I will explain more. And at GeoMate, we use computer vision for mapping, for example. So these technologies empower key sectors at the industry: healthcare, transportation, finance, manufacturing. But in transportation, for instance, which is the field that I'm working on, we have self-driving cars that use computer vision to perceive the environment, and deep learning to interact with the environment, to interact with the human and the pedestrians, to interact with the other cars, and with the built environment. So now I talked about key technologies in AI, but we have another recent growing method, which is called generative AI. And Stefaan talked about generative AI in the first talk. It's a branch of AI that generates new data that resembles existing data. It's not the existing data. It tries to mimic the pattern. So there's a difference between the real data and the generative AI produced data. So we have models that learns from patterns of text, images, audio, and more to generate realistic data and coherent outputs. We have text generation, we have image generation, we have audio and video synthesis, but there's another concept that is quite recent, and I'm not sure if you have heard about it. It's really fascinating and scary at the same time. It's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. So what is AGI? It's a theoretical concept that aims to create machines capable of performing cognitive tasks like human cognitive tasks It's different from the tasks that are repetitive, right? So imagine you have an assistant which is capable of adapting to different situations, learns based on interactions, and performs new tasks. And if you ask me, based on the research that you've done, when does AGI come? I have learned it's 5 to 10 years, but it's always 5 to 10 years when there's a new technology. But AGI is very powerful, and it's really different from the existing AI that we have. So now let's talk about some trends. We have predicted growth areas, mainly in autonomous systems, predictive analytics, NLP, and we have breakthroughs in quantum computing, federated learning, and AGI or GAI, general intelligence. So I was reading a book a few weeks ago. It's called The Coming Wave, and I really recommend you, if you have time, to read this book. It's about the future of AI. It's by Mustafa Suleyman, and he thinks that what's coming next is on synthetic biology in the AI, and it's like personalized medicine and sustainable food production. So it's changing the genomes and producing something that hasn't been existed. So he thinks that this is the next breakthrough, and it's not about NLP, which many people are thinking it's about NLP. And here I would like to have a specific focus on AI in transportation, as this is the field that I have been involved and I'm biased towards. So AI has applications in transportation, in autonomous vehicles, predictive maintenance, traffic management, optimization, and fleet management. In the autonomous vehicle, we have self-driving cars, which anticipate where to go based on perceived environment. And they have sensor fusion, deep learning based on interactions, as I mentioned, interacting with human on the go, as well as perceiving the dynamic environment. And companies like Waymo and Tesla leverage AI, and they use the decision-making process and route planning and managing the obstacles on the go. So these applications have overlapping goals of creating a mobility that is faster, smarter, and more efficient for everyone with different capabilities. And it's interesting that all of them share one data gap, that is detailed maps that are used for planning, deployment of their models, and testing in complex urban environments for seeing the edge cases before going to the environment and getting surprised with the edge cases that they may see. And at GeoMate, we are trying to fill this gap. We create high definition maps of the environments for testing and simulating, and we use AI for mobility for all. So Ashleigh, this is basically committed to doing good, AI for good, and I think we can do even better. We started with mapping accessibility for people with mobility disabilities. The market is very small, but so we expanded the services to mapping for more industries, including the AV. So a few last points here. AI continues to revolutionize business. Opportunities are coming, and there are, of course, emerging challenges, as Stefaan and Ashleigh mentioned, but I didn't get a chance to talk about those challenges. For successful adoption of AI, we require collaboration across different sectors to mitigate risks and address ethical considerations as well. And lastly, strategic investments in infrastructure will be vital for sustainable AI growth. I think there were a few discussions around this, that we need more capital for bringing AI in-house. But I believe that AI in-house requires workforce as well as collaboration with different sectors. And yeah, I hope that we have the opportunity to contribute to this field. And as I mentioned, we are committed to do good and responsible, and I hope we can do make mobility for all using AI as a small part of this community. Thank you so much. So what's the plan? Should I leave or?
You can sit. Do we have any questions for the audience for our panel? I just want to really thank all of you for sharing the possible futures. And if I could ask you guys a question, I'm sitting there going, if you just had to tell me the two things, I'm going to say two, right? Because there's never just one thing. The two things that you think are absolutely critical we do to have a brighter future rather than the dark one. So I'm going to start with, let's go with Stefaan. We'll go in the order of the presenters. Stefaan?
Yeah, thanks for that easy question and for me putting there on the spot. Well, meaning, let me answer with almost building upon what Ashleigh was saying. And as you know, some of you who have followed some of my work, I do agree is that data is not gonna make a difference unless we actually have a clear sense on what's the question that actually will make a difference and what's the action that then needs to happen once we have the answer to that question. And so, my recommendation in order to really steer to the future that we want to have is to really reflect on what are the questions that we currently cannot answer, but could answer if we would make data more accessible and reusable. And then second action would then be, how are we then organized to act upon the answer? Is there actually a commitment to act upon the answer when we actually have the insight that we need to make progress? Because from my point of view, it's a failure at the first mile, i.e. what's actually the question that matters for the problem that we seek to solve. And it's a failure at the last mile. How do we then actually act upon the insight in a way that makes a difference? And so that focusing on the first and the last mile is probably a way to get the future that we want, not the one that we might get.
Great points, thank you. So Ashleigh.
Is it on? Is that on? I'll just talk loud. You need the mic?
I think you need the mic. Here, go here, yep.
So I completely agree with Stefaan, and you stole my answer. But to build on it is not only the question, but what problem are we solving? And how do we know that that's the problem? So often we think about taking the poison out of the water once it's already in, rather than preventing the poison from going in the first place. And so we have to get much better at identifying the actual problems that we're trying to solve, and then going and finding the others. Who else is working on it? How can you work together? And then finally, how will you know that you made it? What does success actually look like? And then finally, the part of that I think that complements what you said, Stefaan, and I think is the missing sort of secret sauce to this is, I often refer to Scent of a Woman Policymaking, and it's sort of an older movie that probably those of us with more gray hair than others will know. But there's a line in it from Al Pacino that says, I always knew what the right thing to do was, it was just too damn hard. And so we have to stop making that excuse. When you've identified the problem and you've figured out what the right way to go about solving aspects of it and breaking it down until you can actually find a piece that you can solve and then build from there, you also have to have the will to do it. It's not enough to just build a better mousetrap. Why are we building a mousetrap to begin with? So I think when you get your purpose right and then the will to actually do it and tolerate the discomfort of understanding that maybe the questions you like to play with aren't the questions that need to be played with right now, then we'll get a lot closer to moving towards that future we want to see.
Okay, oh, this one is working. Okay, so I think it's from our judgment too, because we know what is the problem. We can't deceive ourselves, right? Because we have judgment. Systems, machine learning tools do not have judgment yet, but we do have judgments as humans. So we know what is good for our society and what is good for, other things for just making a business grow. So it's hard to define the boundary It's really difficult, but it's down in our heart that we can define what is a real problem and how, if I am committed to solve this as a part of this community, then yes, I need help. I want to take a step. I need help. I need an infrastructure. And this conversation really ignites this, triggers the movements from each individual, because everything, every work starts from us, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you three so much for sharing your lenses on our open future. And I'm not going to let the rest of you off the hook. I'm going to ask that as you go home today, you think about what two things are you going to do, right? So that we have the bright future that we all want. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Connie, for moderating that panel. That was a brilliant way to end the day. We've heard a lot today. There's been a lot of really great insights shared. There's been a lot of great calls to action, and I'm taking a lot of that with me to process, because I think there's a lot to process, and we obviously won't be able to get through it all in one day. But I hope that the connections that you made here today are able to continue, and you're able to continue having these conversations. I'm buoyed by some of the conversations that we had about working towards big challenges. I know climate change was brought up quite often. Ashleigh had the call to kind of what are we doing to make an impact on the communities that are around us. I think this idea of tech and data and AI for good is something that's going to grow, and I'm happy that we started that conversation here, and I hope that it continues. I think one of the common themes that I heard throughout the day was also collaboration and working together. I know it's a theme that comes up in almost every one of the conferences every year, but I think it's really important as we find ourselves perhaps a little siloed, whether that's the pandemic or whether that's just the nature of the world right now. As Merlin said, you know, we have to acknowledge our complicity and really think about how we can work together to address some of the challenges that are facing us. So really taking with us this idea of collaboration and partnership. Another thing that's come up has been about building capacity and tapping into the community to build that capacity. And a lot of the conversations that I've had outside of the conference itself, it has been around how does the community get back involved with the public service and with the not-for-profit sector and the private sector, and really thinking about how we can leverage the people who have the capacity, who have the skills and the resources to help those who don't, and making sure that we're working together again for this vision for good. And then finally, thinking about change, really thinking about change as not just being resilient to change, but actually being conscious about change and being a marker and a force for change rather than just taking change and building resiliency into it. So how are we conscious about the change that we're creating? And the change that we're creating, whether that's in climate change, whether that's in helping the unhoused, whatever it is, that change is something that we can do consciously and together, collaboratively. So thank you so much to everyone that brought all of these things together. Again, I know this has been a really packed day and there's a lot to ruminate on, and I hope to hear from a lot of you as you ruminate on these things in the weeks to come. I want to thank people again before we go. First, the City of Kitchener for hosting us, and of course Communitech for being our gracious physical space hosts for today. They've been great at helping us pull everything together and giving us a space to have these kinds of conversations. I also want to thank Unmarketing Group, Be Spatial, MISA Ontario, the Community Foundations of Canada, Open North, Code for Canada, and Sustainable Coburg for all of their support putting this thing together. I want to thank all the speakers. I know some of them aren't here yet anymore, but I want to thank them all who came and shared their insights with us. I want to thank the AV team who have done an incredible job of engaging people online and in the room to make sure that we're all connected and we're able to have these conversations together. I want to thank Yuri and the whole conference team, and especially the GOOD Board of Directors who have put together not only this conference, but conferences over a decade, bringing this community together. And it's been great to have this space, and they are to be lauded for the work that they've done. And finally, I want to thank Yuri in particular, who will be stepping down from his position as chair of the board, and all of the time, sweat, and effort he's put in to this open data community over the years and making it what it is. So really, thank you to Yuri, and a round of applause to Yuri. Before you go, tomorrow, Hack for Good, the hackathon is happening. We're going to be looking at projects around heat disparity and extreme weather. It's going to be really exciting. If you can participate, please do. As Lily said, if there are ways you can contribute to the students, please think about engaging with them to build the next generation of people who are engaging with these topics and talking about the things that we're trying to do. So thank you very much. This has been lovely. I hope to see many of you again, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you, and have a great evening.